myself again.
Hi and welcome to NUFC Matters. This is another in our NUFC Newcastle United Disunited series, and today we're going to look at NUFC Fans United and something which I was part of along with Steve Hasty, and that is why, Steve, you're on the top row tonight. But as always,
we could all get in the top row because Mitch was involved with it as well.
That's right. Well, Mitch was involved as well. Keith, not so much with this one, but because we've done the shows together, it's just nice to have everybody on board, and also good to get other people's opinions, I guess, on what they thought of what we were doing at the time. But Steve, obviously, we left the last episode with a departure from the NUST, the trust, and you had a bit time out.
I did, yes. You could call it that. Not much time out, but I wanted to just walk away from the whole fan politics. You know, we'd been involved since 2008. It was now 2011. I'd gone through the NUSC. I'd gone through the setup of NUST, the Yes We Can campaign, which I was heavily involved in, and then of course I then left NUST, and reasons for which probably will become obvious as the show goes on. But yeah, I wanted a little bit of time out, and just looking as an outsider as what was going on. But I remember getting a call from you, which said, "Do you fancy a coffee in town?" And I'd had a couple of these calls in the past. Do you want a coffee in town? And then I would turn up and I'd meet someone, and there would be some Hollywood star, or there would be some actor who was up here, or a boxer, and we'd end up having a cup of coffee and a chat, and it was great. So I just turned up, and as usual in Rev's bar, and there we were having a nice cup of coffee and a bit of chat about what's going on in the town and in your life. And you dropped the bombshell that you'd been in touch, or someone had been in touch with you about the state of the fans and the lack of dialogue and the way that the situation seemed to be, where fans were no longer interacting or having any communication with the football club. And they thought that there was a gap in the market, for want of a better word. I mean, it's not the phrase that I would normally use, excuse me, but just as an explanation, they felt as though there was a huge gap had been created between the trust and the football club. And they also felt that with a little bit of sort of dialogue, a little bit of decent conversation, and a little bit of common sense, there was always the possibility that the two sides of each side, the club and supporters, could come together and at least start talking again. Remember, we'd had Lambias, and we'd had the storming of the Bastille almost with Mitch and myself and the rest of NUSC a couple of years back. So there was a lot of angst. There was a lot of bad feeling that still existed between the parties. And you wanted my thoughts on it, and you knew that you probably knew that it wouldn't take much to drag us back. I think you were surprised that it did take a lot more than that, but I think it was sort of trying to play on my conscience, if the truth be known. Especially when I found out who it was that was feeling as though that, with their expertise and their knowledge and their history, that they felt it was something that should be put in place. So I listened to what you had to say, Steve. I think we also had a couple of telephone conversations with that individual, and it kind of made sense, if the truth be known. I remember leaving the meeting that we had and thinking, I need to have a conversation with a certain Mr. Mitchell here and Mr. Corcoran and see exactly what they felt. Because, as I said right at the start, it wasn't something I particularly wanted to get back into. And I thought, do I want to do it on my own? No. Do I need the backing of friends? Almost certainly. Do I need the backing of friends that I can trust? Undoubtedly. And do we, as a collective, really want to get back into that scene again after what we'd gone through only, a year earlier? So that's what happened. I had conversations with Bill. I had conversations with Neil. Carried on the conversation with you. You can be very persuasive, by the way, Mr. Ray. You can be very persuasive. It didn't quite take an arm up the back, but I did feel at one time that it was a case of, well, if you want to carry on coming into the bars that I'm on the doors with, you're going to have to play the game, Mr. Hasty.
Wasn't that bad?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't that bad. No, but when someone's trying to convince you to do something that you're not really sure about, you have to take counsel, don't you? It's only common sense that you would take counsel from people. And one of the things we did, having spoken to Neil and Bill, I met up with you again in the same place, and this time you arranged for Mark Douglas from the Chronicle to come along.
And, we went to Revolution, didn't we? That's
right. We sat in Rev. I call it Revs. You can tell I had a daughter who have been students in the past who all call these bars Revs instead of Revolution. But we sat in Revolution bar, and we had a chat and kind of mulled over the idea with Mark, and got positive vibes. There was definitely a feeling, and we wanted to know if it was just us, but there was definitely a feeling that there was a need for some sort of dialogue to restart. The fans liaison officer was a chap called Simon Esland, and obviously also in that area was Wendy Taylor, who was part of the media team at the club. And we got in touch with them and we said, look, we've been told that you want to talk. Is that true? And sure enough, the word that we got back was yes. We'd like to have a conversation with you. Off the record, private, explain why we think it would be useful, what you would get out of it, if you set it up properly, and if we buried the hatchet on some of the past angst that had happened. So, I mean, when you hear things like that, you think, well, that we need to seriously consider this, which is what we did. We considered it among ourselves. We considered it long and hard, really, and decided to have an open meeting. So we had an open meeting. I think it was the 24th of February, 2011, when we put out an email to a whole host of people that most of us knew. Whether it was a fanzine editor, a podcaster, which weren't really podcasts in those times, was people doing stuff like you were doing on the radio and that type of thing, Steve. It wasn't video podcasts. But there was a lot of different groups out there, Toontastic and a lot of blog sites. And we invited everybody along and said, look, come along, hear what we've got to say. What we wanted to do was kind of like almost a TUC, a trade union congress of fans, that would come together and we could talk over the issues and try to come to a common understanding on some of the subjects that we could talk to the football club about. And initially try and understand what it was that we wanted out of this football club in the form of dialogue, what we wanted them to listen to, what the main objectives were, and what the main issues that we felt needed to be discussed. But they need to be issues that were going to be discussed that would be a two-way conversation. And that was the difficulty, getting people to understand that. And most of the people that we invited came along, not everybody. Some groups came along and told us what an absolute farce it would be. It was a joke that only NUST should be allowed to speak to Newcastle United. Others just didn't turn up at all, one or two. But in the main, we had quite a cross section of fans that turned up at that first meeting. Strangely, when one of the issues had been a lack of any dialogue within the fan base itself from NUST, and we had tried to have roadshows put back on and things like that, and there was just a dismissal of all of that type of conversation. It wasn't going to happen. So I think we knew that if we could get all the fan groups together, at least they were getting the opportunity to have their say, and they were doing it face to face. They were doing it among each other. They were sitting around the table with each other. They were understanding how one had an issue because there were a singing section on level 7. Another had an issue because the vast majority traveled to away games, were having trouble with tickets. somewhere in the Gallagher end and didn't want to be there. They wanted to be back where they were in the Leazes and vice versa. Whole cross section of issues. Some of them wanted to have more done in the community. Some of them just wanted to have the ear of the football club. And they actually, when we announced we were having this meeting, there was then a hurriedly arranged NUST meeting 2 days later that was also put out, which I found was strange. I think you've probably got the I think I sent you a copy of the little piece there that Steve. That was,
I've got that. Yeah, I'll stick that up. Yeah, there was a letter put out, wasn't there?
That's right. And this, I mean, people think I have an issue with NUST, but this is an example of what they wanted to talk about at the time. And as you can see on that, a public meeting, a survey, which might fascinate Keith, this, because it's a staggering 96% of supporters felt the current owners don't listen to their concerns, and 78% believe that they should be allowed to take a stake in the football club. Over 4,700 fans responded to the survey. And then they wanted to basically have a meeting to talk about that, to talk about the fact that there was going to be 96% of those who had answered felt the owners weren't listening, and 78 wanted to have a stake in the football club. The lads around the table and lasses around the table that came to us, they wanted to talk about more transient stuff. They wanted to talk about, well, why am I not allowed to move from X to Y? Why am I being forced to move from seat Z to seat A? Why have you disbanded the singing section? Why are we having to move to the Gallagher end, etc., etc.? All of those type of things, So it was like a bit of a dichotomy, I suppose, for want of a better word. But we had the meeting, and we carried on, and it became a regular event. It became
my memories. I'll stop you there. See, my memories of that first event were of the growing animosity between certain parties, and I think that was, the split from the trust certainly caused issues between people, but that wasn't the major issue that night. And I'm not going to name names, but one particular fanzine editor was there that night who clearly came to say that he wasn't happy about this, and he was clearly pushing the trust's agenda. However, the other person who was there that night was a writer who had left his fanzine, obviously months earlier, and clearly was somebody who was the polar opposite opinion of him. And clearly, we were more concerned about there being actually a physical confrontation between those two guys. However, it didn't turn out like that. There was a few crossed words, but I think that just cemented the fact that, we were never going to have the support of one of the fanzines or the trust. And that was the reason that particular, mail shot went out from the trust to say, we are the only democratic organisation. This is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it. Mitch, I'll come to you. Steve mentioned the fact that he bent your ear about this particular project, that I'd come to Steve with. What was your take on it?
The timing for me was difficult, because I was sitting on a job offer from the Middle East, and life was about to change significantly for me. I'd come away from the trust for reasons we discussed last time round. My frustration with the trust was, ironically, lack of communication. That the incumbent that took over after me as chair decided he didn't want, nor felt like he had to, speak to anybody, memberships or otherwise, and was going to sail the ship in the direction he saw. They painted themselves into a corner with a club in terms of communication, and for me, dialogue with the club's essential. In a proper functioning football club, there shouldn't be a need to do something like this, because there should be vehicles that would allow everybody to have input, and it should be club driven. But of course, in our dysfunctional club, that doesn't happen. As we discovered with the NUFC days, you can't knock on the door. You've got to kick the door in. You've got to present them a done deal. I was all for any way that we could get dialogue going again, because dialogue is the only way that can make certain things work. You can fundamentally disagree with what somebody's doing and be polar opposites in every way, shape, or form, but you can still have dialogue, and that dialogue can still be healthy. It doesn't make you a traitor or a quizzling, or many other words that were chucked at Mr. Hasty, by the way, over time, and being accused of all sorts, when at the end of the day, the only agenda out of all of this was communication, and that's one of my big things. I learned so much of that doing the roadshows with NUFC and NUST. I can't, reiterate that much. Reaching out and speaking to people, opening doors and holding dialogue, and it's the old adage: you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And you've got to have that. Communication's essential, particularly with a club like Newcastle United, the way it's run. Because, and again, we've said this till we're blue in the face, there's some great people have been and still are working within Newcastle United, but their wings are constantly clipped. They're constantly hamstrung by the actions and inactions above. But where possible, when that dialogue gets going and it becomes open, you can achieve all sorts. And it seems like, and it always felt like, and even now it feels like, the Trust feel like they should be the only and sole means of communication with a football club. And as a founder of the Trust and an interim chair, I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think they're an important source of dialogue. I think they're a very, very important source of dialogue for the club. They should be the club's critical friend. But not everybody wants to be a member. And so how do those people get dialogue? Not everybody wants to have a stake in the club. So how do they get dialogue? And I think there should be as many different ways and as many different avenues for the club to be able to interact with fans of all types in all areas in all ways, because without that, you're only getting one side of the story. And it's ironic that the fans forum that eventually came out of this was recently, I think we could say recently, dismantled into something less effective because of the actions of the Trust. And I think that's just, it just says it all. And that's the frustrating thing here. But the agenda was only ever proper dialogue and useful dialogue. And to sit with so many different people, what you guys actually did was manage to get certain people in the same room who I never thought would sit in the same room, including the two people you've just been talking about. And that in itself was a big thing, and something that I was prepared to push and support as much as I can, even though in the not too distant future I was buggering off to the sun in the desert, and still chipping in from the sidelines from afar. But it was never, as Steve said, about getting one over or being petty or getting back at the Trust. It was about establishing dialogue for as many different people as possible, and there was no other way to do that.
No, and I was approached to do that, as I say. I mean, there was people within the club who wanted dialogue with supporters, and as you say, the fans liaison officer position was Simon Esland, who built up good relationships with supporters. Wendy, of course, coming in the media department, she was crucial. She wanted to try and make a difference. She wanted to make her job easier, I guess, in the long run. And she saw fans as an important part of that. So, credit to Wendy. She doesn't get as much credit as she deserves because, some people, I think in those early days, just felt she was a bit of a smiling assassin. But she was actually a really nice girl who nice woman who came in, did her job professionally and, who tried her best. And that's a positive. Keith, I mean, you didn't have a great deal to play in this, but you watched. So when you heard about this idea, I'm sure Steve will have mentioned it to you. What was your thoughts? Because obviously, you've seen one of your best pals, Steve Hasty, get treated so badly by NUST at the time. Were you thinking he was a bit daft for getting involved again?
I think it's something on all of these series that when there was NUSC, I understood it, and I was involved with them and helped them. And my liaison point was always Colin Whittle, and I never imagined that Steve Hasty wouldn't be a critical part of all this. So as though if Colin was in it, Steve Hasty would be in it. And when I heard and saw what happened to Steve Hasty, you can only speak from your own point of view. If that happened to me, I could never have gone back. So for you to be able to get him in a pub and persuade him to come back or to bully him, it's a big thing, but it's a big thing for him to turn up for the meeting, really, because you wouldn't have invited him down, Steve Wraith, if you didn't think Steve Hasty you might be able to get him round. But I imagine, Steve, what you were doing, you didn't want to do it without Steve Hasty. And being honest, being straight with you, Steve Hasty, I think you were mad to do it. And something Mitch said resonated with me great. He said, because I always got the impression when it changed from NUSC to NUST, I got the impression, because I was very much involved at the start, and as it changed, I got the impression that they thought they were the only people who were allowed to talk, and I got the impression that they thought they were only people qualified to talk. And a lot of the meetings I heard that you all had, I heard they all seemed to break up because of people's egos. And even today, I'm going to put something on record now and say, what the Trust are trying to do now with the pledge of getting a seat at the table to talk the club, I think they've already had. I think you had that with the fans liaison group. I think you had a vote and a voice, and I think you were invited along to the club. And with, you know, in the days of Lambius and the days of even with the current setup, yous had a position to go and talk the club, and you were listened to. But the feedback I got from people outside of it was they wouldn't sign minutes of meetings off, they wouldn't do this, they wouldn't do that, and they spoiled it. And now it's as though they're fighting back to have that right for a voice. But for Steve Hasty, I thought he put his life and soul into it. I thought it was nothing without him. I'm not just saying to patronise him. I thought you were as instrumental as people like Colin Whittle. I couldn't imagine it without you. I know that Mitch got stitched up big time about you now, chairman. We're going to have a vote for chairman. It's not you. And a lot of you, I just wonder why you kept going, because I have a philosophy that if you're not wanted, then I can do better things. So Steve, from an outsider, to be questioning Steve Wraith, from an outsider, I thought Steve Hayes was a bit mad. I thought you were very persuasive, but my proof or my support of my opinion stands today, that I still see lack of support for supporter groups and events and movements, and massive buy-in to their own schemes. Whatever they're doing, they buy into, and whatever anyone else is doing, they can't give a vote or they can't support. So I think you're a bit touched, Mr. Hasty, but it's your nature, because what you like to do, you're a helper and you're a doer. And like, whenever I ring you, if you haven't got the answers, you go and get them. So if I was doing anything in the future, I'd be wanting to wrap you into it. You know what I mean? And that's what Steve Wraith did that night when it was them two meetings. When he went to Rev.
Just get me to persuade him, and that's it. Job's a good one. So, Steve, obviously the meetings, the first meeting's out the way. You were ably assisted by Zara. We've got to give Zara, some credit here. Bill Corcoran is always on hand to give us the Irish Centre, which is always a blessing for us when we've got meetings, and always thankful to him and his dad. But Zara was a big player in this as well. She, to those of you who don't know who Zara is, she was the director and producer, one of the directors and producers of We Are the Geordies, which of course we all promoted on here, but all love as a fan base. So yes, just tell us a little bit about how it progressed and a bit about Zara's involvement.
Yeah, I mean, I had never met Zara until that first meeting. Like a lot of people around that table, a lot of lads and lasses who turned up, they were totally new to me. But what I got from the meeting was like there was an interest there. And Zara stood up at the meeting. Well, she didn't actually stand up. She had a leg in a brace. She just had a knee operation, if I remember rightly. And that shows you, someone who's just had a ligament operation and her legs in a brace, and she still turns up. And she wanted to turn up and say that if this was going to come off, she already had a website address of NUFC Fans United. And she felt as though if there was going to be something put in place and it was going to be galvanising supporters of Newcastle United together, then what better a name to have than NUFC Fans United? And she, as I say, she offered that facility if we wanted it. Now, it wasn't my decision on whether we should be taking her up on the offer or not. It was very much a decision of the people in the room, because we needed to gauge whether or not there was the appetite for to actually carry on and set this fan group or movement or series of meetings or whatever you wanted to call it, and set it in place. And that's what we did. We felt, you know what, let's show some of the people in the room how serious we are, and how serious we are in the fact that the football club are serious about it. And we turned up on a I think it was a Saturday late afternoon on a Saturday in the Strawberry, and sat with the two people that you've mentioned, Steve, which were Wendy Taylor and Simon Esland. And they came along and they sat and they listened, and they went round the table, and everybody got their opportunity to speak. Everybody got the opportunity to show that they were coherent, sensible, forthright, and honest, but also willing to listen. And I think that gave the club that sort of confidence, if you like, that this could work. But it gave us the confidence to know that there were enough people willing to turn up at various meetings at various times and still wanted to get involved. There was one girl turned up and said, I'm a website designer. I'll do your whole web layout for you. Zora's got the web address. I'll work with Zora on that. So this was how it just sort of like evolved, if you like, but it evolved in a way that we had to keep it going. At that point, it was then that I realized that this was there, and it was going to be an opportunity for as many fan groups and people as possible to feed in their position, their thoughts, their angst, whatever you want to call it, their issues. But they felt as though this was an opportunity for themselves to be heard and for the club to listen, because they obviously felt as though they hadn't had that in the past. So we made it a regular event. We made a regular monthly meeting. We started to take minutes of those meetings. I think you've got a copy of one of the very first set of minutes that we had, because we didn't just jump into this. We waited until the season was up and running. And there's an example of one of the topics that was discussed, Steve, which was communication and its direct effects on supporters. And these were matters that we were raising, and passing these minutes and passing these notes and correspondence to the football club and saying, this is what we're talking about. These are the topics that are getting under our skin, and these are the sort of comments that are coming back from fans. And it was it was a precursor. What we wanted to have the fans forum back. That was the ultimate aim. But we needed the club to understand that as a group of fans, we could hold sensible conversation, sensible dialogue, and could be trusting enough and organised enough. And I think the key to it was organised enough for them to then have to listen to us. You know, that there was the willingness to listen, but we needed to really, really push that. Simon Esland left. Lee Marshall took on the role of fans liaison officer and carried on. And then Lee started to turn up at the meetings as well. And he started to take notes. He started to take feedback back to the club. And that's when some of the issues started to get resolved. So even without a formal fans forum, issues were being raised with the football club, and Lee was able to resolve those issues and do it fairly quickly as well. Issues that fans had about tickets, issues that individuals had, matters that fan groups had. They then had the ear of someone who could actually go away and come back with an answer for them. And I think that was the point when it turned from a group of fans having a monthly meeting, and we held them in the Irish Centre. And if you remember as well, Steve, we held them in the Cosmic Ballroom. Sometimes if the Irish Centre's room was booked out, You very kindly arranged with Steve down there to open the bar a couple of hours early, and we would sit in the room there before it then got filled up with students later on in the evening. And we got out quickly because it was pretty obvious that we were not students. And we had it became to the point where we basically had the club by the collar, and we're going, you've got to reinstate a fans forum. This is why. And then we sat with them and talked about how that could happen, what the format should be. And we also hammered home the fact that it had to be in front of Derek Lambias. It had to be in front of Lee Charnley. It had to be in front of John, who was the finance people at the football club. And if necessary, Mike Ashley. Now, it became obvious right from the start, and we all know, and it's carried on till today, that Mike Ashley was not going to be there. But we had everybody else in the room. We had all of the other people, the decision makers, if you like, on finance, the chairman, the director, the secretary, etc., etc. And we're able to bend their ear and let them know exactly what we felt that was going wrong, what they should be doing to put it right, etc., etc. And I look at this
as a big change as well, Steve. This is when Twitter, social media, became a bit of a player. And come to you, Mitch, about some of these other groups that were sat around the table at these meetings. And I know you were on your way to the Middle East, and you're still out there. But we had United for Newcastle and Kev and his mates. We had the Mike Ashley Out campaign, which was headed by a guy called Graham Cairnsdale. There was lots of different faces who came to the initial meeting who drifted away, but those were fairly steadfast, and they both had social media followings, Mitch, and that's when it all changed a little bit, isn't it? You would go and set the social media group up, and you've suddenly got 2,000 followers. You've got a little bit of power, or so you felt.
It changes your reach. It changes the way messages can be put out. That's why I've always been big on certain forms of social media. What appealed to me about Twitter in particular was you had to be concise. Particularly when it was 120 characters a tweet. You had to find a way to get a simple message out very, very quickly. But it changes your reach, it changes your ability to shape a narrative. And I think that's very important. The advantage for something like Fans United to have people of different views and coming at the meeting from different standpoints, all feeding into it and then feeding out positive news from that was quite useful, because it meant you had different people with different agendas coming together saying, oh, right, we had a successful meeting tonight because we've done X, Y, Z. And it was very, very easy to see. Yes, there was a little bit of vying for pecking order, for want of a better word, within that, but you're always going to get that. It's herding the proverbial cats, but in this case it was herding a bloody pack of lions, but that's maybe a different matter. But I think that was really important with the rise of social media. I mean, a little point on Lee Marshall, who takes some stick at times. I've got a lot of time for Lee. With the various things we did with Fans United and the various things he did with getting the fans forum in place, he's got family out here, and he used to come and have a beer with me if he was out visiting the family, and spend time picking my brains on top of all of that, and there's not many people in roles like that would even bother their backside to go and do something like that. And I always really feel he gets a lot of stick for a lot of bad reasons, and doesn't get the praise he deserves for a lot of the work he's done on the scene.
Yeah, I would agree. Keith, social media, something relatively new to you with all of the the situation that developed with the takeover in recent times. But that was when social media did become a lot more influential. And like Mitch has said, you only had a set amount of letters that you could use, but it just seemed that it changed the narrative a bit. In the old days, when you wanted to get a group of people together, you would hand out leaflets at the ground. You used to print them all. And essentially get people together in a pub. You would go out and do rallies and meetings at places. But the internet changed all that, Keith. Probably not for the better either, I would say.
It was new to me. And when Mitch talked about 120 characters, I struggle with 240 now. So I write the message out, and then I have to take. All right, I've got to make all the ands into an and sign, and I've just got to reduce it. But I remember those days well, and I was working in design. I had a business, a print business with a design function. So I was getting a lot of those messages out, and when it became digital, your life did change. And it's not that I wasn't used to it. It was Twitter was just a forum that I'd avoided through my working life. I had businesses that had Twitter accounts where we employed people to run those Twitter accounts, but I'd never actually done them myself. Unfortunately, when you start talking to QCs and things, you have to be the person who actually writes the message to keep it accurate. So in them days, I think Mitch's point is great. There was a lot of people getting relevance because they were getting followers and things. And social media was growing them a voice. But again, call me an outsider, but I always used to hear about these meetings you lot are referring to now, where everybody and his brother turned up and everybody was coming represented. And I used to hear about them. People say, "You coming?" I'd say, "No, I'm not bothering. Tell us what happens." And invariably, it's easy for me because I was an outsider. Somebody broke it. Somebody decided we're not doing it. Somebody said, somebody let you down every time. Every time there was somebody crashed it or didn't turn up or wasn't prepared to go ahead. And there was a lot of vociferous noises about what you were doing wrong. And I just think when you're trying to do something like you lot were, they should have been getting behind you and tell you what you're doing right. But
yeah. I mean, obviously, Steve. Yeah. Go on, Steve. No, you go on.
In the early days, it was great because we had like-minded people around the room.
Yeah,
I think when we move, if we wanted to jump to what happened in 2018 and fan groups wanting to start protesting it inside the ground or outside the ground, that's when the whole dynamic changed. But at this particular junction, this was fans. So you had a group of fans that wanted to be really radical, wanted to do something, wanted to really make a statement, wanted to be in the press, wanted to do something that would shake the club. Then you had other fans that were wanting to basically discuss the ticketing arrangements and the fact that they were being moved from level 7 and the lack of, they were being moved from where they were singing because somebody had allegedly complained of the language that was being used because it was next to the junior section and stuff like this, and they felt as though there was an awful lot being made of issues that didn't really exist. So they wanted to get that point over to the club. Now, I mean, you mentioned the Make Ashley Out campaign. I think the first radical thing that Graham wanted to do was to dig up the memorial stone that he had paid for and take ownership back. And that was a very radical thing to do. But it was a statement that Graham wanted to make, and we all stood behind him, and we all stood alongside him when he wanted to do that. And we thought about it and we talked it over with him, and wasn't the right thing to do, but that's what Graham wanted to do, so he was supported in that. Then there was obviously the various marches that wanted to take place, where they were trying to get people together. I think one of them, obviously, Steve, involved you, and it became a very, very well-known protest.
Well, let's talk about that one.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, well, that was tell us about the meeting and how it progressed into that, because Graham had obviously done that infamous removal of the stone, as you say. It was something which he discussed. It was a fairly high-profile event, that, and very significant, removing the stone. And those of you who are watching this and don't know what we're talking about, the club obviously came up with the idea of being able to buy a stone outside St James's Park. You paid a price, you had whatever you wanted engraved on it, and there what you find outside the Milburn stand, if you look down on the floor, I've got one with me, my dad and my brother's name on. Yeah. So what Graham decided to do as his protest was remove the stone, and he was, as far as he was concerned, he was entitled to do that. So this was the start. And of course, Mike Ashley then, in his wisdom, decides to rename St James's Park, which of course has been the name of the ground since we landed there as Newcastle United is Sports Direct Arena, and this caused absolute furore amongst the supporters, and rightly so. It was even changed on Google Maps, and just had the fans overhyped, me included. But this was just as NUFC Fans United, of course, was building its relationship, Steve. So
That's right.
I'll let you take over what Graham's suggestion was from then.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had all witnessed the crowbarring of the name off the wall. I mean, sacrilege is a word that, probably not a strong enough word to use for an awful lot of fans. And if anything, this galvanized a movement of fans like I'd never seen. A simple thing of changing the club name and sticking a space there. I think if it had been a sponsor, then people could have maybe stomached it, or they could have understood, and then a dialogue could have been, well, why? What's the reasoning? But to crowbar it off, to show as an example of what it could be by calling it the Sports Direct Arena at St James's Park, and saying, well, we're not actually getting anything for this. The club's not getting anything, but it's to show people what it would look like. Well, you could have done that with from an email. If you wanted to call it the Emirates, St James's Park, or the SO St James's Park, or whatever. You could have. You found the sponsor first. You don't go out and say this is what you could have had. This wasn't like the darts program and here's the speedboat. This is what you could have won type of thing that you're going out as a marketing ploy. It's ridiculous. So at that point, I think, and you've got to remember as well that stone that Graham dug up, I think it was a memorial stone. I think it was to his father or something like that, who had passed away. And so it meant an awful lot to Graham. So it meant a lot to take it away. Taking the stone away from the ground that his father had gone and watched Newcastle with. And it meant an awful lot to him. And it did hurt him. But at the same time, it was something that symbolically he felt as though he wanted to do. And that's why we backed him.
Did he get any hassle? Did they try and stop him doing it?
I think he went along on a Friday night at 5:30 with a chisel and a hammer and a photographer, and chiseled it out from then, and then left a little hole in the floor. I think if I remember rightly, I don't think the club even noticed. There's the picture. I don't think the club even noticed he was there, if I remember. I may be wrong, and then the security could have come. But to me, it doesn't look like he had any hassle. It doesn't look like he got in a bad way.
If I can just point something out here as well, that is a very good lookalike, which of course we'll come to in due course.
Exactly. So obviously the next course of action was that there needs to be a march, because what they've basically done is they've killed St James's Park. St James's Park is no more as a name. Sky were the first ones to jump onto it. The BBC didn't take long to latch onto it as well. And I know various letters went out to the BBC and to Sky, and there was a campaign, and fans were up in arms about it. I think that if I remember rightly, some of us wrote to the BBC complaining that it was against the BBC charter, that they should be calling it the Sports Direct Arena at St James's Park, because they were involving themselves in something that was not a name that had been conjured up as a financial obligation, or following a financial obligation or financial deal. This was literally a free promo for Sports Direct. So we even went as far as that in complaining. But at the same time, the vast majority of people wanted to protest and wanted a march through the town. So that's what was arranged. There was a march came through. It took a lot of work to get to that point. There was a lot of conversations with Northumbria Police, as they always are, with the council. They immediately come out and try to charge, because they said it was under the Mike Ashley Out campaign banner, so there would immediately be a ridiculous fee for closing roads and stuff like that. I mean, at one point, I was talking like $4,000 and stuff, for to police your own march, etc., etc. It was getting stupid. But the lads who wanted it, they stuck by it, and they did go ahead with the march. But they wanted something at the front to show the death of St James's Park, and they decided they would have a coffin. And a guy in Wallsend who ran an undertaker's, he said, "I'll provide you with a black and white coffin."
He was a relative of Graham. He was a relative of Graham's, I think.
He might have been, yeah.
Go as you please.
Go as you please, yeah. Go as you please. That was what it was called.
And they were provided with a coffin, and the lads started the march, or arranged to start the march. And I think at some point, with about 24 hours to go, whoever was going to be leading the march at the front,
the vicar,
as a sort of, you know, as a cortege, as carrying the coffin and the person from the Undertaker's leading it, I think they either dropped out or couldn't make it. I can't remember the exact reason for it, and I would hate to surmise. But they looked for a substitute. They needed somebody else who would step forward. And you think this is when arm twisting really was seen to come in.
Is it Steve Hasty now goes and gets Steve Wraith to the pub and says, "You got to do a job for us."
I must
end of stage left.
Yeah, I didn't actually do that. And if my memory serves me right, when the suggestion was put forward, and it was like, you know, everybody step forward. Right, if you can't do it, take one step back. And meanwhile, Steve Wraith's being distracted, and poor Steve Wraith's left standing at the front. What's going on? And all of a sudden, he was the person who was nominated to do it, or certainly he was the person that everybody looked at and said, "How about you? You're an actor." And I think that was basically how you managed to be persuaded, Steve. It wasn't far off.
Yeah,
that
I mean, look, it was the fact as well that there was a script written. There was a script written as well, which Graham had written, and he said, "We need somebody who's an actor who can project his voice. You're the man." And I thought I haven't played a great deal of you know, a part in this, but why not? What harm can it do? So I agreed, Mitch.
Yeah, well, it was. I think the final conversation you had about it was with me. I think that was where you were sort of like weighing it up in your head about what I'm like. Just think of it like an audition, man, Steve. Just you'll get something great out of it. I mean, obviously it's been used as a stick to beat you with for the last God knows how many years as well, but and unfairly, I may add. But the way you stepped up with the plate to help that out, but everybody then assumes it was all your bloody idea, and it wasn't. So far from that, it's untrue.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, the day itself. I remember going to see a good friend of ours, a vicar down at one of the churches in Newcastle. He actually lent us his cassock, and he fully agreed. Yeah, Glenn. He fully agreed with the protest, but at the time he was also the club's clergy, so he couldn't really support it himself. And that was one of the original ideas, to get an actual vicar to be at the front, but he decided that his job at Newcastle was a little bit more precious than giving it away by being at the front of a protest, and that was it. So yeah, I was in. I was given the script. We met at the bottom at the Gallagher end where the coffin was picked up. We walked around up Barrack Road, and we ended up at the top end of the ground towards the back of the Milburn stand. And I just remember looking up towards the glass atrium and seeing people looking out, and people clapping in the street. I remember people joining the cortege, if you like. And I remember Olivia Bernard coming up to us and shaking my hand as I got to the wall where we were going to do the speech. And, that was it. I did a speech. The media were there, not just local media, the world's media. I did a chat, as did Graham. I do remember being fairly reluctant to do many interviews that day, because I just felt, I hadn't organised this. I felt a bit of a fraud because, I've been asked to do this at the last minute, and I felt there was people who were better than me who were more capable of speaking about why they'd chosen to do this. Graham, especially after doing the brick escapade, I felt, as the person who'd helped, put this plan together, he should have been at the forefront of it. But, and again, a lot of negativity. I mean, some of the Mike Ashley out crowd didn't particularly like me. They felt that I was going to hijack things that they were organising. And, I felt that again, this probably didn't do me much good in the wider fan base because, you know, I just felt, you know, I'd stood up and was counted, but it completely backfired on us, as Mitch said. And you know, the wrath of fans on social media, people saying I was an embarrassment, Rates organised this, typical him, self-publicist. It's probably the lowest I felt as a Newcastle fan because, you know, I was asked to do this and I didn't, you know, it wasn't me organising it. I was part of a committee which, you know, talked about it, but you know, it wasn't me who sanctioned it. I hadn't put the plan together. I just, you know, jumped in at the last minute to help the lads out. So I've got to be honest, I was pretty low and pretty disappointed after that. Although I put a brave face on, as I always do, you know, mentally it really affected me, that whole protest, because, you know, I felt, you know, I was forever going to be, you know, ridiculed as this vicar figure, and took us a while to get over it. I mean, you know, Mackems are on the case as well, you know, and laughing at us. Although I did manage to find the wonderful photo from 1973 a year later on the internet of the Mackems actually holding another coffin. They held the original one, the death of Leeds United, and walked a coffin across the pitch at Roker Park, believe it or not. So that's always the one I fire back at the Mackems these days. But yeah, it hit me hard. I mean, Keith, you will have watched that as a supporter.
I was at the game, and
what did you think about it?
Truthfully,
honestly, I'm not going to be offended, mate.
Just I thought you were all a bit mad, and I got a laugh out of it. You know, I did laugh at it. The only vicar in the UK with the Adidas Samba trainers on, but I thought to myself, and it is the way I think. I think it might be an age thing. This getting on. I thought what they're going to achieve, what they're going to get out of that. And you know, it is. I would never ever knock anybody that's done any campaign to see change. However, I was the one. The very first show you put me on, he said, "Is it out?" You said, "Is it Ashley out?" And I said, "No, it's Ashley in to get him out." And you know, Mitch once said on this show that you're the first bloke who ever knocked on the door and said, "Can we help you leave the club?" And I've always been of that ilk. If somebody owns a private business, he owns all the shares, that he's not just going to pack up and go. And I did massively dislike the rename of the ground. And there's lots of things that's happened that I wouldn't vote for and I wouldn't endorse. But I still have always thought that you've got to get his blessing or his agreement to get him out. And like right now, as we sit, you know, in August, middle of August to 2021, we wonder whether we've come so close and yet it might not happen again. But right back then, I wanted to change like you lot did. I just didn't really buy into how you were doing it. And I saw a lot of the campaigns outside Sports Direct, and I used to wonder, I used to ask myself, will this sicken them off enough to want to leave? But I used to always walk away thinking there'll probably be another way to do it. For you to do it and stand up, I mean, I knew people that were involved back then. I spoke to Steve Hasty, and you know, I knew that you weren't the main organiser, and I knew that you were the bloke who'd stepped up to help, but I knew in doing so you'll get all the shit for it.
Yeah. I mean, Steve carried the can. You carried the can on that one. So there's no question.
You did, you did. It was all bad press about you.
Exactly. I think just to point out, the whole idea of the Coffin March was the death of St. James's Park. It was the loss of the name. It was the fact that he was wanting to sell it off, couldn't sell it off, didn't know how to sell it off, didn't have a marketing team with any nous about them other than, well, let's show people what you could have had, you know, like, and it was just a ridiculous way for them to go about, and it was to bring into focus among the fans worldwide, football fans worldwide, that we were being run by an organization that was supposed to be one of the biggest sports emporiums in the world, and yet they couldn't even market a change of name for their own ground and had to advertise it by making everybody so angry about it that it became toxic, and no company was ever going to stick their name on it anyway. And that's it's that dichotomy, it's that ridiculousness about them, when there was probably a damn sight better way to go about getting what they wanted if they'd had the dialogue with the fans,
talking to people, talking to people,
and then promoting it and advertising it and pushing it out there, knowing that whoever came in would have the backing of the fans behind them. You know,
it's like so many of the things that have happened under Ashley. The crux of the matter is not very often what they do. It's the way they go about doing it.
How they do it.
Which tells you, which what does that tell you? It tells you who do they listen to, who does he take his advice from, and this goes back to something that right at the very start of his problems. Who did he take advice from? He took advice from Dennis Wise. He took advice from Viteri, people like that, on how the football club should be run as a football club. While dismissing the advice of a man like Kevin Keegan, who had slept and drank Newcastle and was black and white through and through, in terms of knowing that he had the love of every single supporter behind him, and he couldn't grasp that. He didn't like that.
That
whole never know, but that's what it shows you. How that football club at that particular time, and probably still, is being operated because he listens to the wrong people at the wrong time about the wrong subject matter.
That whole ground renaming was classic at the time move. It was an international weekend, so there was no game. So it was 2 weeks to let everything calm down. Even Wendy Taylor didn't know, did you? Until something like 7:30 in the morning that the announcement was being made, and the guys came with the crowbars to St James's Park at 8:30.
I think so. She knew before her.
Yeah, and I mean it just typical of the way that they do everything. Yet if they'd had a dialogue, had an open dialogue with a group of supporters who said, "Look, we've got this idea. We're going to open up an income stream that's going to allow more money to come into the club. That's going to allow more money to be spent on players. That we don't have to put in. That you, as the fans, don't have to put in. But the price is we're going to change the name of the ground a little bit.
Yeah,
we're going to keep St James's Park, and we want everybody to call it St James's Park, but we're going to have a sponsor's name attached to it. And then it wouldn't be a toxic brand. It would have been an attractive brand for someone."
Yeah.
And again, they've probably done it the other way around. So St James's Park sponsored by whatever, you know. Either way, they just got it also that's it again. And so they used to always do it. I used to always get jumpy on international breaks because there was always something shitty was going to be done the first weekend of the international break, so that 2 weeks before there was fans back in the ground, and they would just hope it would all calm down by then.
Yeah. If you don't know your customer base, then how can you sell things to them? How can you sell them if you don't know what they're about in the first place? And that was that biggest downfall. And I think that leads us into what happened next, Steve, which was the gates, wasn't it? That was
I'm not going to dwell too much on this one, by the way. Just the lookalike thing, and just to remind you that me and Graham do tend to look quite similar. There was another Coffin march, which was a little bit later, to object to the Wonga sponsorship on the shirts, and the idea was again that my Ashley Out campaign came up with was another Coffin march. Now, I did not take part in this Coffin march. It was Graham Cansdale, a.k.a. Willy Wonga. And he actually travelled up in the coffin and got out of it. But many people seem to think that is me. That's not me. That's Graham Cansdale, Willy Wonga. Willy Wonga, Graham Cansdale. Graham Cansdale.
There's a dodgy vicar in the background as well.
There's a vicar in the background who isn't me. So just to clear that up, we're not going to dwell too much on that one. But look, I've got nothing against Graham Cansdale. I know for a fact that his heart was in the right place. He did everything he could for NUFC Fans United as part of the Mike Ashley Out campaign. Very connected guy, and somebody who fell out of love with Newcastle United because of this owner, and him and thousands of others. So if he is watching, just want to say, it was good, working on him with these things, even if it did bring us a load of grief. Yes, let's move on to the gates, and Steve. I guess I can start this one off.
Yeah.
I was basically contacted by Sir John Hall. He rang us out of the blue one day, and after chatting about the current state of the club, he just happened to drop into conversation that he'd stumbled across the old St James's Park gates, which he had found, believe it or not, in a field in Wynyard Hall. This was the gates, and this was the state they were in. They were lying basically face down in Wynyard Hall. He tripped over them. Now, it carried an interesting story because for years he'd actually accused Freddie Shepherd of taking the gates and using them as scrap. Something which he had to then basically apologise for, because from his perspective, he'd made a big mistake, and he stumbled across these on his as I say, on one of his daily walks. So he contacted me, and he was clearly unhappy with the way things were going with Derek Lambias and with Mike Ashley in the running of the club. And I think he always felt a little bit guilty that he'd sold the club to this guy who hadn't really been as good as his word. And he said, look, Steve, he says, I've got these gates. Would you like to do something with them? Now, from my perspective, I'd gone on to the guys and said, I'd spoke to Steve Hasty about it and spoke to Graham Cairnsdale. And I said, look, John All's offered us these gates. I don't know what the hell we can do with them. We had a meeting, and at the meeting it was suggested that we could actually put them up on the other side of the road behind the Gallagher, facing St James's Park, as a bit of a two fingers to Mike Ashley. So old Newcastle United on one side of the pavement, Newcastle United under Ashley on this side of the pavement. That was the idea in the mindset. John All loved the idea, said he would happily help us with it in some way, shape or form, get a price for how much it would cost to get these gates drilled into the path, see if the council would be up for it. It was crazy to be even involved in this whole scheme, but that was where we were. So John All bequeaths the gates to me. He says, you can have these gates for free, and you do what you want with them. So I basically then said, well, I bequeath them to NUFC Fans United as a collective to the fans. We see what we can do with them. So what was your thoughts, Steve, when I rang you up and said, I've got them old gates from St James's Park?
Well, I thought you meant the original ones from like 1909, and I was thinking, what the hell are we going to do with them? They're these big slidey gates, like I could remember at the back of the Gallagher, and I'd forgotten that he had obviously those big horrible green slidey doors that they used to have had gone. That you could they had replaced them with a redevelopment. And put this set of gates up at each end. So, I mean, the first thing was like, is this a joke? Then it was a case of, like, all of a sudden, Graham was really excited, and he thought, and the rest of the lads around the room, and when we were talking about it, were like, oh, what? I think so. John moved them up to Wolsingham, didn't he? He brought them up from Wynyard, and he put them in Wolsingham, and he said, come up and have a look at them. So we all piled up to Wolsingham in the car. And there's Sir John standing at the corner of this field at the entrance to where the private air strip is at the private airfield at Newcastle. And he took us on this long winding walk through. Poor Malcolm Dix was there, and Malcolm had a knee operation or something like that, so he was hobbling through, and we're worried in case he was going to trip over bits of wood and bracken and all sorts. And we got there, and then we're standing in this like sort of open area, and we're going, well, where are they? And he goes, oh, hang on a minute. And he goes off, and he calls one of his farm hands out, and he comes along with a great big tractor and starts lifting up all these bales of hay, and he moves all these bales, and then right under the bales is this one set of gates, and he goes, there you are. I put them under there to protect them. So he's got all these piles of hay bales stacked all over the place. So Graham and his pal, Graham had brought a mate of his along with him, and his mate was I coined the phrase metal basher. He ran his own foundry place I think it was down at Bladen or somewhere like that. And he says, look, he says, if we can get them on a high ab, we can take them, and at least they're out the way. So next thing you know, we're back up there a couple of days later with a high ab, and the gates were lifted by the farmer. He put them down, and then they were hoisted onto high ab, and they were taken away. And I think we're talking like anything between 6 and 10 grand to get these gates like tidied up. You know, we're going to get them sandblasted and then put back together. So at this point, we thought, because we're going to raise the cash. At one point, I think Graham was all for paying for it himself. You know, and we go, whoa, you can't do that. And we said, you know, we'll have some events. We'll raise the cash, and then we obviously they were at the foundry by this point, and we met Stephen Savage from the City Council. If you remember, Stephen, we took him up, and we'd been to the council office and explained what we wanted to do. Steve said, I'll come out and have a look. And we wandered up and down Strawberry Place, telling them where we wanted to put them, him measuring up with a tape measure and steps. And, oh, well, we can't do that. We could do this. We have to look at that. I'll get back to you. And then it became apparent that this wasn't a simple task of being able to put a set of gates up on a pavement. All of a sudden, we were getting the bureaucracy of health and safety. They had to be so far from the side of the road that they couldn't be open in case somebody tried to shut them and jam their fingers in them. They had to be insured. They had to be the council would have to take ownership of them after a year, but we would have to cover the insurance for the first year. You name it, it was thrown at us. Still with the smiling face of Stephen Savage from Newcastle City Council. Oh, yeah, it can be done, but plenty buts about it, you know.
A Mackham, it has to be said, but a good Mackham.
Yes, he's a Sunderland fan, but, you know, let's not hold that against him. He helped to put on some good events at St. James's Park over the years. Anyway, I digress. So we could see the pound sign stacking up here. We were thinking, what the hell? What's John Hall dumped on us? You know, a boatload of scrap. We're going to get like 10 quid for it or something like that. You know, if we're weighed in. So we then thought, you know what? Let's tell the club what we're doing. Let's just, you know, even if they don't go up, we'll still tell them what we're doing. So
and at that point, I'll jump in, because word had already got to the club that we had these gates.
Yes. And
because the relationship between me and Derek Lambias, shall we say, by that point had deteriorated, he'd heard that Wraith has got the gates. He wasn't very happy at all.
No.
To the point where he issued quite a strong letter to Sir John Hall, telling him in no uncertain terms that having those gates was basically a bit of a naughty move on his behalf, and he shouldn't have them, and that they weren't his property.
That's right. Which,
if anybody knows Sir John Hall and knows his character, if you start telling Sir John Hall that he's done something wrong or he's in the wrong, I'm afraid there's only one reaction you're going to get, and it's not a very positive one. Yeah. And John Hall certainly give him 2 barrels back. So there was a frank exchange of emails, to which Sir John notified Derek Lambias that he bequeathed the gates to me, which meant that our communication with the club probably wasn't as vitriolic as we would have expected, Steve, and we ended up having a rather pleasant exchange of emails between the club and ourselves about how we could take this forward.
That's right. How we could take it forward amicably, I think was the word. We would like to work with you, I think was the phrase that was coined, Steve. And we'll even work with you, Mr. Wraith, I think was the added sentence that was tagged on the end. So at this point, it was a case of, what are you planning on doing with them, lads? And we told them, well, we're going to stick them up. We're going to put them straight opposite Shearer's Bar. It's going to have St. James's Park, and we're going to get them. They're going to be nicely tidied up. And it's kind of two fingers to you. When we're honest with them, we're telling them why we're doing it. You know, it's got St. James's Park written on there, so that every time we will arrange for every time the TV come to interview us, we will be interviewed. Any supporter will be told to be interviewed standing against the gates that say St. James's Park, not against the sign that says the Sports Direct Arena at St. James's Park. We will not have anything to do with that name. And that was what it was all about. And we would encourage the BBC, would encourage Sky, everybody else. If they wanted to interview fans, we would tell fans that that's where they had to stand. That's where we would do the TV interviews. That's where we'd do all the pre-match stuff if necessary. So, of course, you can imagine how that went down. A couple of weeks went by and we got... we've been thinking about it. We'd like to work with you. We would like to do them up for you. We would like to take ownership. We'll tidy them up. We'll pay for the whole thing. We'll have them fitted. So Steve spoke to Sir John and told him what was happening. And he went, well, that's good. Just keep your eye on them. Make sure they don't do anything untoward with them. Remember, they're your gates, etc. And I think we came to an agreement that that's what would happen. So that's where we left it, really. We arranged for them to pay for the refurbishment, for want of a better word, and they said that they would put them up on the land at St. James's Park. They said they would have a conversation with us. They would find somewhere suitable that we all agreed with, and they would have an unveiling that would invite Sir John Hall too. As a sort of, I suppose, a way of Lambay saying thank you for bequeathing the old gates back to us, but at the same time, kind of an apology for what had gone on. But I couldn't swear to that. So we left it with them. And next thing we knew, we got word back saying the gates were now refurbished. We're going to put them in a suitable place. We're sure you'll be happy with it. Come along on Saturday and we'll have an unveiling and we'll open a room up where members of your group can come along. The press will be there and we'll have an unveiling of sorts and Sir John can lead it, etc., etc. So we'd put a couple of places that we wanted them, mainly on Barrack Road, mainly wanted it so fans could walk around them, so fans could get a photograph taken on either side of them, that type of thing. And I think we turned up on the Saturday, Steve, for the unveiling, and lo and behold, they'd stuck them. There it goes. We knew nothing about the location, nothing about what they decided, and they stuck them against the wall. Not what we imagined, not what we wanted, but kind of a fait accompli, if nothing else. Did we have to eat humble pie? I suppose we did. I suppose in hindsight, we should have kept our eye on the ball a little bit more. But I think from our perspective and from our point of view, despite where they ended up being put, the fact that they had St. James's Park written right across the middle of them was enough for us, because that was symbolically what we were looking for when they were going to be at the back of Shearer's Bar, facing Shearer's Bar. They gilded them up in the right way, refurbed them in the right way, did it respectfully, but unfortunately where they put the gates wasn't where we wanted them. Dear me, I haven't seen that photograph for a while, Steve. I can see John Irvin in the black and white tie, who was the finance director, Malcolm Dix in the middle with Sir John from the Magpie Group, myself at the end. I'm not too sure that.
And we had a fan, didn't we? There was an oldest fan and the young. It was a season ticket holders picked to do it or something, and then one of the youngest fan who got selected. That's right. There was all. I mean, they did a good job. They made a decent hit of what they could do. We had somebody came up and said that they'd been part of the original setup, didn't they? Who had built the gates. Was a guy came up and that was good. Dear me, look at the state of that one as well, Steve. I know, and I'm pointing to the sign there. Now, this was one thing that we did get, and that's still there for everybody to see. But the wording of that was quite particular, Steve, wasn't it? Just about the fans working with the club.
That's right. These gates symbolise exactly what we were about, you know, and it has the fact that this was the club working together with a fans group. I know a couple of fans groups that weren't very happy about it, too, in particular, but they didn't want to enter into the conversation. They just wanted to criticise after the event, and that's the nature of Newcastle fans. That's the nature of what we've had to put up with for God knows how long now. And it became water off a duck's back to us, to be perfectly honest, Steve, at this point. The fans forum was in operation. We were getting good input with the club. We were able to talk to them. We were able to do things like that with them. But at the same time, we were able to criticise where we felt it was necessary. And there was plenty of occasions when criticism was necessary and was right.
Yeah. I mean, Mitch, coming to you, just the gates. I mean, it's a bizarre thing for a supporter to be asked to do by one of the former owners. But, I mean, nothing surprises me in my Newcastle United life, I'm afraid. But that is another one of those bizarre situations that I found myself involved in and of course, took all of you guys along for the ride.
Got more bizarre for me over here at one stage because obviously I'm getting copied into all these emails and asked for little bits of input for gates, and my head's like, what bloody gates? And you know, my initial reaction was the same as Steve. What, you mean the big green bloody things from the 1900s? What the hell? And then when I realised what we were dealing with at the time, I was speaking to a guy called Jay out here who was part of the 2 Canadian attempts to take over, and I was sitting having a beer with Jay actually, and we were bouncing a few things around, and I happened to mention about the gates, and he says, "Oh, you mean the ones from Sir John's garden?" And he knew about the existence of the bloody gates because he'd been and had a few meetings with Sir John at Slaley, and he'd obviously mentioned them to him at some stage. And I'm like, what? How do you know about the gates? I didn't know about no bloody gates. And Steve didn't know about any bloody gates until it was dropped on me. He says, well, what are you going to do with them? I says, well, this is... And at the time, I think we were still at the stage of talking about raising the money to do it ourselves. And he's like, oh, see if I can persuade our lot to help you and da-di-da-di-da. But it was just like, my head was spinning with gates. And I think the eventual... Do you know what I think was behind the eventual placement? And you've already talked about it. If the council insisted on things like insurance in case somebody opened them and squished their fingers between them, and if you wanted them so far from the road and all those kind of things, weld them together and stick them up against the wall. You don't need to pay any bloody insurance. You just hang them up against the wall. That's exactly what that placement is all about, really, which is sad. But can you see Newcastle United paying a single penny more than they absolutely need to for anything? You know, under Mike Ashley. And so they've looked at what's the lowest risk and least cost strategy once we've paid to have these gates done up, hide them against the wall over there and weld them together. That's what we're going to do. And as frustrating as that is, and as infuriating as that is, I think you're right. I think you've got to take the pragmatic view that they were prepared to cooperate and they put them across the ground. And that name St. James's Park was emblazoned there forever, no matter what else they wanted to call it. And I think that was the most important thing out of it all for me.
Yeah, that's right. That was a symbolic bit, yeah.
I guess, Keith, it was just damage limitation, wasn't it? As Mitch says, on behalf of the club, they probably felt that diffused the situation. And of course, Mike Ashley, once he got the publicity that he wanted from renaming the ground, of course, renamed it St. James's Park again, which was a win-win for him. More publicity for his sports brand globally.
It was clever when he renamed it back to St. James. But if John Hall had bequeathed them to me, they'd have been on my house. That's what I'd have done. Yeah. I'd have, to go down the drive and open them up. To me, I'd have paid good money for them gates because I thought they were awesome. But I think you lads deserve credit for what you did because, you fought as part of our history and you got them. And whilst I know what you mean about putting them on Barrack Road, put them up as shoes, bar and all this, I can see that you can imagine, if there was any movement on those hinges whatsoever, there'd have been accidents, there'd have been risks of cars hitting them, there'd have been risks of people on bikes hitting them, there'd be, people walking into them, and. So you know what insurance is like these days. So it then becomes an obstacle. But when you see some of the bizarre developments people have got in the Northeast, you think they would have found a place where they could have put them on stone and mounted them as, you know, for years to come, like statuesque. But when I look at them, you know, and I saw them there, I think they look brilliant. You know, I think it's like symbolic and it's big. So I think you did a better job than what you give yourselves credit for. You know, I think they look great, and I can see the logic from a business point of view of sticking them near a wall. But like yous, it must have been doable for the council to put stone pillars and put them as a fixed item, you know, fixed openers, or to make an entrance out of them. Do you know what I mean? So when you drive in, there's this brick and stone, and then there's these gates open. They could be permanently opened, but I think they're fantastic things. Like, and I think the fact that you lot got them, and it's bizarre. We sit here tonight talking about, you know, one John Hall having them blaming Freddie Shepherd, then them going under bills here, and then you look at them, you know what I mean, bequeathing them to Steve Reardon, and it's just another crazy story in the legacy and history of this football club that you know, when we all passing away and we're knocking daisies up, and people see these videos in years to come, and people read these stories, they'll just think, what a bunch of crackpots them lot are. I mean, they're gonna look, you know, there's gonna be some Ben in, you know, 2062 is gonna say, wow, that's Steve Hayes, he had some sticking power, didn't he? He didn't bottle it very easy, did he? You know what I mean? Like, and they'll say that Keith Patterson was very edgy, like he wouldn't put up with that. You know what I mean? Because that, like, you have put up with so much, and that I couldn't put up with. And I just think that's what makes us magical about this club. It's an amazing thing, and just to be a part of it is incredible. Everything we've talked about tonight, you know, is about getting a better future, and how much you have fought over the years for a better future. And, you know, we just so badly want to compete. And all these stories are just the same thing about hanging on to the little bits we have. You know, people say we're deluded. Hanging on to a pair of gates that's knackered. You know what I mean? That's what Newcastle fans are about. You know, we don't expect to win the league. We just want to compete. We just want to be a part of it. But you lot, honestly, you deserve medals like dustbin lids.
We've had some times, that's for certain. Okay, well, this is the penultimate episode. We're going to have one more before I get back from my holidays, and that's going to be about the Fans Forum, how NUFC Fans United progressed, the Fans Forum, the beginning, the middle, and the end, I guess, of the Fans Forum, and where we see supporters groups going in the future. I think we'll have to touch on NUST again, probably on the pledge a little bit as well, but that will be the final episode, and you can catch that tomorrow night. But lads, thanks for joining us. Take care.
Take care.
Right.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again.